Welcome, everybody. How are we doing?
Go right ahead.
Hey, welcome to Finding God in Comics. Really glad that you're here. Everybody clap so we know you're real. Yay! All right.
Those are real people.
There's real people here. And this is the fourth time we've done Finding God in Comics at North Carolina Comicon. And we do this because we are people of faith who also love geek stories and geek culture and love to think about and reflect how our faith intersects with the geeky stories we love. And then thinking how the larger story that shapes our lives when it comes to our faith shapes every aspect of our life in terms of geek culture or whatever culture we're a part of or engage with. And so we're glad that you're here. Over the last few panels, has been a couple of flavors. We've done interfaith panels. We've done just a handful of us. And then we've noticed that as we do these panels, that when you get like faith leaders and pastors and leaders up front, sometimes we tend to ramble a little bit. Sometimes we get long-winded, as Pastor said, we get a little long-winded. And then we notice as we go through the panel that we want to leave room for questions, and by the time we get to the end, there's like 5 minutes. So this version of Finding God in Comics is going to be like all question and response. I don't say question and answer because we may not have an answer, but we can definitely respond to a question, right? So question and response, question and answer. We want to hear what you're reading, what you're geeking out on, and the questions you have for what we do and how we engage faith with fandom and faith and geek culture. So why don't we go down the line, introduce ourselves, share our faith perspective, maybe one story we're geeking out on at this moment, and then we'll jump right into questions.
Oh, I guess I have to put my phone down long enough to actually respond. I was like, I'm hashtagging this. Anyway, greetings. My name is Chris Poirier. I have multiple hats. I am the manager of Ultimate Comics Cary. I am also the communications and media director for this wonderful Comic-Con known as Oak City and Bull City. Thank you. I take absolutely no credit, but maybe a little. And I also just recently changed my roles at my church. I am on staff with the Point Church. I am at their Cary campus here in Raleigh, and I am their outreach director. And things I'm geeking out on.
What is like
just about everything, obviously. But I would say probably the thing I'm reading the most and talking about the most right now is Tom King's run on Mr. Miracle.
Yeah.
Because it is just absolutely trippy, and there's a lot of interesting interwoven stories that are going on there that obviously we can talk a great deal about faith just in general, because they are dealing with suicide and a lot of other really heavy issues, but doing so in a very creative way.
Yeah, it's a great book.
My name is Hector Miray. I am a pastor in Lumberton, North Carolina. I'm the writer of the Faith and Fandom devotional series. It's a book series of essays on faith and geek culture, Bible studies on superheroes, video games, sci-fi, comic books, anime. I've been doing that for about 5 years. We usually set up at about 28 Comicons a year. And it's basically me and my friend Vincent that have been doing it for a while and just have a passion to kind of relate the gospel to geek culture, and for those that are in geek culture that are curious about God, to kind of be a bridge in between that. Just a passion of mine. And let's see, what am I geeking out about?
If you had to pull one book that you're going to read,
The Bible.
geeky
Sunday's School Answer.
The Bible, the Action Bible.
This isn't what I'm geeking out about, but I did find it really funny. When I started doing this, there was never anything official geek and God together by Zondervan or anything else. My wife found a Star Wars themed Bible at Sam's Club, and it says, "May the faith be with you," and it has like a Star Wars cover, and that's like there's not much substance beyond that. But I was like, wow, look how far we've come. But for me personally, I know that he mentioned Tom King's Mr. Miracle. For me, I've honestly gotten a lot out of Tom King's Batman in pretty much since he took it over. But there's just been some really great moments. I think the thing that hit me most really recently was issue 39 and 40. There was a 2-part arc where Batman and Wonder Woman were trapped alone for 37 years, and he's engaged to Catwoman, and like it's a story. It's just a 2-issue run about integrity, and I hit Tom King up as soon as I was done with it. I was just like, thank you for this. You know, it not only made me appreciate Batman more, but it made me want to be a better man.
Yeah.
And so you know, there's just been a lot of stuff that Tom King has done. So Tom King is probably my favorite writer in comics right now. But that's me.
Cool. I'm Will Rose. I am a Lutheran pastor in Chapel Hill at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. I been helping lead this panel for the last couple of years. Come on, guys. We got some seats over there. Feel free to fill in. And I do a God Loves Geeks book club in my church. I found some members of my congregation in my last church and this one that geek out on different things, and we talk about movies and talk about the comics we're reading, and say, well, let's do like a book study on this. Let's gather once a month and pick a reading of the month, and then talk about what we like about the story and the art, and then pull out what we apply to our faith and what themes do we see in terms of scripture and faith and the current issues that are part of our lives. Let's see, a couple things I'm reading. I'm really liking Black Hammer by Jeff Lemire. I love that book, and the spin-offs with that is so good. I like Jeff Lemire's work. It's got a Watchmen-esque feel to it, wouldn't you say, Chris? Is that
it's definitely kind of that hero/anti-hero type vibe. That it's what if superheroes were kind of just like our rather nihilistic culture, more so than just always. They're old, tired, and they're trapped in another dimension. They don't know how to escape, so they're like, who cares?
Yeah, and then they ask the big question. So in terms of like finding God in comics and God Loves Geeks and Faith and Fandom, what questions come out of these books that really go deeper into what it means to be human? What do I believe? What is justice? All those things help us wrestle with that. And then how do you say Charles, is it Soule? Mm-hmm. His current run on Darth Vader is really good. And it's like Vader Year One. It happens right after Episode 3. And it's really, really good. Every issue is just fantastic. Really help identify with Vader. So, questions and answers. We have a full room here. Lots of people. Are there questions you have for either of us about? Yes.
For anybody that wants to take it. You talked about things that you're reading. Can you, I'm here mostly because my children are in here.
Okay.
It suggests things that my kids would read. I've got early teenage girls. Can you suggest things that I can encourage them to read that would encourage them in their faith?
So recommendations on reading for teens and engage in the story. Hector, you have a new book on youth ministry. What would you engage
Hector.
in terms of some stuff to read to engage the stories?
Personally, one of the better things I enjoy right now, especially for teens reading, I highly recommend My Hero Academia. That, you know, outside of just comics, but there's currently 11 books in the manga, and there's sort of 3 seasons of the anime so far, but it's a good story run of what it means not just to be a superhero, but to be a person of character, to be
What's
a
the
hero.
name of that again?
My Hero Academia.
My Hero.
Oh, or if you're trying to be official, it's Boku no Hero. Boku no Hero Academia? Yeah, but I'm not on that level. That's been something that's good. Honestly, Tom King's Batman run is a big deal to me. And
I'd say for a slightly younger audience, though you said daughters, but still, Super Sons is about to end, unfortunately, but is a great teenage-level story. It's literally Damian Wayne as Robin. So Batman's, what's that? Technically the 4th, but yes, his son. Lots of Robins down that path. That's a long discussion, right? And then Superman's son, and what they do basically as being rebellious teenagers that also are either super powered or involved in super teams. So everything from basically like not making curfew because they're out literally fighting crime
Mhm.
to whether they tell things to their parents or not. There's like regular teenage stuff occurring in that series, and it's written at a great level. And I really have felt like a lot of people started that series and went, wow, Superman's kid is just getting beat up here. And everyone's like, is that going to be the story that he's just going to be just
Bullied
bullied
yeah.
relentlessly by Damian? Because that's Damian's character. And there's a redemptive arc in that everyone finds out, no, John is very important to the story, and his capabilities and his heart matter greatly.
Teen Titans show up in that
Mhm.
run, and I'm sure that if the graphic novel's not out already, they will
And
put it in the.
So there will be 16 issues in that complete run. So like I said, unfortunately, they're ending that arc, but it's a great set of books. Probably end up in 3 trades when it's done.
Yep.
But that's a good superhero story that has a little bit for everybody.
And there was just on that, there was just, I want to say it was Superman 40 and 41.
Yeah, John crosses in and out of the arcs a lot.
But it's a James Robinson story. The destruction of a planet. It's just a 2-issue story. But Superman and his son travel to a planet where it's about to explode. And Superman's there to save everyone, and the people on the planet don't want to be saved because they trust. Yeah, it's actually
That's
is
funny.
image right there. They travel to the people on the planet don't want to be saved because they trust in God, and if God wanted to save them, He would save them, and they don't want Superman to interfere. And so they actually pray to the point that Superman loses his powers. Like, Superman legitimately loses his strength because of prayer. And then there's a lot of open discussion where Superman's son actually says, well, Dad, we've seen all of these things. What do you believe? And there's a moment where Superman's son literally is like, who do you believe in? And Superman responds, I've seen too much not to believe in something. But he says, but something isn't everything. Just because you see all these other things don't mean they're what you put your faith in. And it's a really good discussion. And it's only 2 issues long. You don't have to read a million Superman issues to get it. But it's the destruction of a planet, just 2 issues. It was really neat.
And I think just in whatever we read or consume, I think that's the important thing. If it helps us ask the deeper questions of what do we believe, what do we stand behind, what do we stand up for, that's really kind of the heart of what we're trying to do with engaging geek culture. Does anybody out there have recommendations for readings? Yeah.
I just started, it's basically DC's ripoff of Spider-Man, but it's Sideways.
Sideways, yeah.
Yeah, I just started that, and the art's good, the inking's good, the storyline is pretty good.
Mhm.
And I think it's going to be very, as far as taking responsibility for yourself and honing your abilities, things like that, teaching responsibility. Sideways would be a good place to start because it's just starting. And
Yep.
it's
Only
running
2
off
issues.
Yeah, there's only 2 issues.
It definitely has a Peter Parker feel to it.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely. He's definitely.
They ripped off his costume completely. So.
Yeah, but reading it, the writing is good, and the colors are fantastic. So it's perfect.
Yep, it's a good book all around.
It's 2 issues in. So
If you want to keep, that's a great question. What are good stories that we can read with our teens or whatever in our congregations that aren't so explicit that we feel like we can get a hold of this? Hit up myself or anybody up here that, hey, I have a question on Facebook or anything. What would you recommend? And that'd be a great thing to kind of pass around and do that. Cool, great question. Other questions?
What else you got?
I know I had one and it's just completely disappeared. So really big right now. I've always been more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy, and I'm trying to blanket cover all of Rebirth as I can, just reading full volumes at a time instead of single issues. Is there a specific? Superman's like a clear metaphor that you can find easy relations to. Is there any other big DC characters that you tend to find connections with? Scripture or anything like that?
Azrael. The Detective Rebirth series started really strong. I feel like it's kind of petering out at this point. But there was Azrael, which if you're familiar, he's the one that when Batman got his back broken by Bane, back in the 90s, he took over, became Batman. But in Rebirth, he's a religious zealot that has gone away from his evil programming, and he is a man of faith. So several times throughout the story arc of the first 12 to 15 issues of Detective, he'll actually offer to pray with people who are struggling, and he'll debate faith with Batwing, stuff like that. And there comes a point where he's literally arguing with the internal dialogue within himself of what it looks like to choose faith over just rules and things like that. So there's a really strong with that. But I've found honestly that a lot of Greg Rucka, when Greg Rucka writes, it's not Rebirth, but if you can look back on any of the Greg Rucka stuff, where he writes Huntress or The Question, the Renee Montoya Question, there are some it was with the Final Crisis run, Final Crisis Revelation is like one of the stronger books in that capacity, where it's dealing with just because you're familiar with the Spectre, which is in DC, it's God's Spirit of Vengeance. Well, you meet his counterpart, which is God's embodiment of grace, and so that's a really interesting character to meet.
Is it by Greg?
It's Greg Rucka, and it's a Final Crisis Revelation, and then also one of my favorite one-shot recommends. It's just a graphic novel, standalone, that's called Batman Chalice.
Okay.
And Batman finds the Cup of Christ, like the
Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And to the point where you literally see Batman sitting in the Batcave questioning everything he's ever believed. And it's a neat little...
I consider myself a big Batman fan. I've never heard of that story.
Oh, it's so good.
I know I'm learning something.
And Oracle. This was back when Barbara Gordon was still Oracle. She examines the carbon dating on the cup, and to the point that it like Matrix style actually spells out the gospel in like when she carbon dates it. And so even Oracle's like, there's a shot of Oracle just like staring at her computer screen like, what? And it's a neat book, but it's called Batman Chalice. But there's just some things like that have always stood out to me. But with Rebirth right now, I think the earlier portions of Detective were probably the strongest thing in Rebirth right now.
And the other one you said was Final Crisis what?
Revelation.
Okay.
And I would just
Yes.
I was going to make a comment. I'm a Lutheran pastor also. Years ago when I was in seminary, I tried to make a projection. What would Jesus have to be, aside from what the gospel says, to do all the things that he does? And I wrote this thing called Jesus Time Walker or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And in recent years, I've decided the character that's most like that is Dr. Manhattan from The Watchmen. Because what he does would allow Jesus to be all the places he is at the same time, and be all the times at the same, and so when Rebirth came out, the sort of the hinge point, which we don't know yet, that Dr. Manhattan was behind all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
If you had a character within the DC universe that was going to be the closest akin to what God is,
God or an actual deity.
yeah. I always thought Dr. Manhattan probably is the closest to that.
He's the one.
And that's being planned out in Doomsday Clock, and
Yeah.
we'll see what
We've
happens.
got the first few issues with us that we going to read this week.
Maybe we'll all be alive by the time Doomsday Clock ends.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Read it in the journal.
And I would just say that another option within the DC universe that is not explicit but is just inherent in the actual storytelling that's going on is the Flash.
Yeah.
The Flash I've always considered to be one of the other beacons of hope in the DC universe, because the DC universe is usually consistently dark and anti-hero by nature.
Right. Yeah.
He likes Marvel.
I actually don't. I have more DC than Marvel in my poll. Yeah, that's why there's a DC person on my arm.
That's
any other character.
Rorschach is barely DC.
Not anymore. Anyway,
Oh, it broke out into a Watchmen.
I know, right?
Debate. I
It's
love
gonna
it.
happen. That just the reality of Barry Allen is always to try to morally do the right thing.
Yeah.
And the entire run that Williamson's writing right now, I don't think he did technically implicitly. It's just the reality of the character, that what is about to occur between Barry Allen and Wally West in this occupying the same space.
Yeah.
I don't want to give anything away because there's an event that occurs that technically separates the two, and we're about to enter the Flash Wars.
Yeah.
We don't know what that
Of
means.
the two Wally Wests that are now.
It's getting ready to be a
Right.
Flash Wars
Yes.
event crossover.
Mhm.
Oh, see, that's why we have
And
That's
somebody in the
what-
industry
that's
up
pretty
front
much what
here.
started the rebirth is because things kind of got split up with New 52, and
Okay.
everything kind of just came crashing together.
But the biggest issue that's unfolding there is Barry has an understanding in his head of what morality and honor and integrity and the right thing to do is, and Wally is about to challenge it. And they're both laying it out on the table, and both are very viable, very realistic expectations of human beings. For us to sit there and go, they're both right, but who's right?
Yeah.
It's very much a greater good versus a good now type argument that's about to unfold.
And I think that what these stories and graphic novels and whatever's in our pull list, I think whether we know it or not, they cause us and lead us to ask big philosophical and theological questions. We're being theological whether we know it or not in terms of these books that we're reading, because whether you're reading Walking Dead or Flash or manga or whatever, you're asking some pretty big questions, and that's what I geek out on and love about geekdom and fandom.
And I know it's not specifically comics, but if you're watching The Walking Dead, I mean, I know it is comics, but not the show. But the most recent episode of The Walking Dead, there was a ton of heavy-handed faith questions brought up, dealing with Father Gabriel and faith versus sight and stuff like that. And there's some college students that I work with that are like on the fence on faith, but like literally Sunday night we were sitting there watching The Walking Dead, and we had fantastic discussions that spurred out of that, because that thing's opened up. And that's one of the biggest things that I try and push people to see is that in Scripture it mentions seek and you will find, and you have not because you ask not. If you are actually looking for spiritual content and things in your fandoms and in the stuff, you're going to find it. And one of the things I always just get into discussion is with the Apostle Paul. Like, he made mention of when he was trying to relate the gospel to the people that worship the unknown God. There's a moment where Paul uses a deity that everyone is familiar with to actually present the story of the gospel. And I like to think that a lot of the stuff that we're into can be used like the unknown God. Like, this is something you're all familiar with, and let me show you how this is really pointing back to a truth. And I think that's essential in the fandoms you're looking into, and the things that what we entertain ourselves with isn't separate from who we are spiritually. What we entertain ourselves with is a reflection of where we are spiritually, but it can also be something to spur us on spiritually.
Well, even the word apocalypse, the Greek word, it literally means revealing, right? So what is being revealed? It doesn't mean like a big final battle. Yeah, the zombie apocalypse, robot apocalypse, whatever apocalypse you want to do, it reveals something that is important to you. So what is being revealed in these stories? What's apocalyptic in these stories that reveals what do you value most? What is moving you? Where do you lay your allegiances, and who is your God, and what does your God look like? It's a big part of that. Questions? Oh, yeah, way right
I
there.
just wanted to mention my favorite character in comics was always, because I grew up watching the X-Men show, and I loved Nightcrawler.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
He was an awesome
Shout out to
character.
Nightcrawler.
He was incredibly kind, even to people that should be his enemy. He's actually descended from two bad guys, and he's descended from Mystique and then from Azazel, who's he's like a demon
Right.
mutant. But he has a really strong faith, and he's able to relay his faith without sounding preachy and use it. He actually, it's not just something he believes, it's something he lives out.
Absolutely.
It's really awesome.
And who was posting around?
I
There was like
reposted
an
it.
old
Or did you
clip
post it first
from
and
the
then-
90s where he's
I knew it was
talking
one of
with
us.
Wolverine,
But I
and
was
they're
like,
talking about
yes.
faith and what it
It
means,
was
and
a
it's
full episode.
articulated really well
Wouldn't happen
and
today.
represents the faith really, really well. And what I like about Nightcrawler, he looks like a demon. Like, you should be like scared of this guy.
Yep.
He embodies everything you see on the surface is a demon, demonic. Yet, at his heart and faith, he is a follower of Christ and a believer. And Lutherans have this theology of being both saint and sinner at the same time, that we wrestle with our being a sinner but being called and drawn into be a saint. And so for me, Nightcrawler really embodies saint and sinner at the same time. He's flawed, he has his faults, but yet he embodies Christ-like love for everyone, even those who hate him. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, go for it.
Well, since you brought up Nightcrawler, I've always liked him. I haven't read a about him except what I see in the movies. But it's always, to me, the reason I like that character is because of the perception. You perceive him to be a demon because that's the way you learn that demons look.
Right.
So he's always been embodied, you know, he doesn't behave like a demon. He's very kind-hearted and always thinking about people. And sometimes he puts himself in these crazy positions because he doesn't want to hurt anybody. He's always looking for that good. That's the way I perceive him. But his look, his image, is always what other people projected. Because I've always thought internally, I don't think he thinks he's a demon. That's what other people think of him. That's how he looks. And because he doesn't want to behave like other people perceive him to be. And that's the same for any of the superheroes. How do you perceive them? Because even though I have issues with Clark Kent, I'm like, the glasses take them off.
Science has done a study that like glasses can literally like fool you.
So if you take your glasses off.
Yeah.
Whoa,
Where did Hector go?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So, yeah, the whole perception of how you perceive somebody, even in today's world, you know, how do you look at somebody if you're male, female, black, or white? You're putting your expectations on
Absolutely.
that person before you even get to know that person, if that person is kind. So that's one. I always gravitate towards those types of characters. That's why I'm having a full-on moment now with Black Panther and the whole world of Wakanda, because I'm like, how do you perceive all of these characters have just been blown up all over the place? I have never looked more forward to Avengers movies.
Oh no! How about that? Yeah, it's a good time to be a geek, isn't it?
The last 10 years.
Right.
Spider-Man has a question.
Spidey, what you got?
Favorite characters and why?
Man,
In like comics or everything?
Yeah,
In comics.
Yeah, just one.
Just one.
Personally, for me, Red Hood is my favorite comic book character, and here's why. For the record, Red Hood is the second Robin, Jason Todd, who was murdered by the Joker, brought back to life, and he came back with a vengeance for the criminal element and also some disdain for Batman. And so they still love each other, but it's a twisted relationship. But I've always loved Red Hood is my favorite because
Red Robin too.
that's another story.
There's a lot of Robins.
Yes. Red Hood is my favorite because I think when it boils down to it, we always try to put ourselves as the hero. In our mind's eye, we're always the hero of the story. When in reality, we're probably less like a hero. In our day-to-day lives, we're probably at best anti-heroes, all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And that
He's the most real and grounded.
he's the most real and grounded, and I think that he deals with his flaws, he deals with his issues, and he deals with his demons, and he's still struggling with that. And I think I relate a lot more to someone who's struggling to become than someone who's arrived.
Yeah.
And so that's always been why I cling to Red Hood.
All right, I'll give you the short 3 answer, and then the
Whoa.
answer. It's still short.
Okay.
Because
Somebody's got a wedding to do here, man.
No. It's Marvel is Captain America, DC is the Flash, but what's come to the forefront recently and why I did this to myself is kind of my anti-hero / really grounded person is actually Rorschach. And it's because the more and more I contemplated on the story and the realities of Rorschach, because most people are sitting there going, you will? Rorschach was not a good person. He looked at the world very nihilistically, that he was a bad person. Murder, completely messed up background. But at the end of a very complicated story, Rorschach faced down his own death and basically said, wait. Even after all this garbage and all the garbage I've put myself through, and then eventually became a good-ish guy because I thought someone should be responsible for people. At the end of Watchmen, he basically gets presented with we can't tell the world what actually happened here. It's a greater good argument that he's like, we got to let that fly because the other side wouldn't be worth it. And Rorschach looked at him and said, no, not even in the face of Armageddon, never compromise. And just at face value, you're like, okay, that's very pretty, it's poetic. But what he meant was, you don't sacrifice what you believe, your actual honor, your actual integrity for anything. And as people of faith, we should very much understand how complicated and how real that statement is. And Rorschach, even though being a bad person and realizing what he was doing, walked out of that conversation to immediately be atomized because he was a liability to the rest of the group. I think, right.
Yeah.
So I think we can really understand that, especially for those of us grounded in the Christian faith, because I think that's realistically that's the choice that Christ stared down in the end. Is we either compromise everything because it sounds good, makes us all feel better, or the reality of that the right decision might end us down a road that is not what we would choose.
Now I understand your tattoo.
Right. No,
No,
that's
I got
and that's why I was like never compromise.
I would not see Rorschach as the Christ figure.
Right? I'm not necessarily fully leaning into that one, but at the same time, I think that the message he was saying was, no, even as messed up as my life was, those are the things you never sacrifice and you never compromise on. And unfortunately, as a society, we're living in compromise now. And I think we're bearing and reaping what that sows.
I would say I'm going to cheat a little bit and say that X-Men were my first kind of love into comics and what got me into comics. And I love team books because I love individual characters, and I lean in towards Batman being one of my all-time favorites. But I do like Detective Comics, what they're doing now in a sense that they're making it kind of a team book, because I like the element of we all have different gifts. And by ourselves, we can do good, but we can do better when we're part of a community and part of people who have different gifts than me. So the X-Men embody, like, you have that gift, I have my gift, let's join together and do something better as a community, as a team. And that's how I see ministries, how I see friendships and community. And so yeah, I do love the Batman books, and anything you do with Batman, I'll into. But those team books, I really love as well. I'll check it out. Other questions?
Yeah, one of the stories I've always found interesting was Hellboy, and being that he is actually a demon, but he rejects that demonic nature. Kind of goes back to what you were saying a little bit about being saint and sinner at the same time, not really choosing the evil and actually defying it to do the right thing, basically. And
it's that whole becoming rather than what I already was before. Yeah.
I have a series I want to add to your list. The Visitor and Why I Came was a 4-part that actually was written on this exact topic. The Visitor is actually, his complete explanation is not necessarily explained in the story, but what we get from this added to Hellboy's story is that the Visitor was sent to witness the event, which was the emergence of Hellboy, which they knew would be the Destroyer. And the Visitor comes and observes, but then sees the path that Hellboy ends up on, working with the BPRD, doing good, as opposed that basically the Visitor's like, okay, I'm going to let this ride until he becomes what we all know he's supposed to become. And the point basically to the entire 4-part is the Visitor never witnesses this, grows old, and is like, he's not going to be what we all think he's supposed to become. And
so that's a Hellboy story, The Visitor?
Yeah, it's literally called The Visitor and Why I Came. And I'm pretty sure it was just a 4-part. Unfortunately, I might have been the only person at my shop that read it.
I'll go find it. I'm going to go hunt it down.
And as I was reading through that, I was like, that's the point of this story, is that the Visitor's like, I'm here. My job is to destroy him because of what we know he is supposed to come. And he's like, he never did. And kind of the backstory to that is the Visitor literally went through 80-plus years on Earth, got married because he's like, he's doing good. I don't have to worry about this problem. And ultimately, they kind of ask him towards the end why he didn't do it. And he kind of says the same thing of, he never became what you claimed he was supposed to be. They're like, but it's his nature. And it's like, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a big red stitch. Yes.
Goku as the Christ figure, your people.
Is this me?
That's you.
Okay.
That's you.
All right.
So repeat the question.
3 minutes, folks.
Goku is the Christ figure. Honestly, I can see that a lot, just because. I mean, if you go all the way back to Dragon Ball, Goku was sent here, but Goku was sent here to destroy. And so I'd say that's where it kind of veers off of that. But when the fact that when Goku arrived, he's literally spent his life sacrificing. I mean, how many times has he died now? But literally, okay, just keeping it early. My daughters and I are watching Dragon Ball Z from the season 1. We started that, and within like 6 or 7 episodes, Goku willingly lays down his life. And so, and I think that's something you see on repeat. And even now, are you up to date?
No.
Okay. But and up to date by like Japan levels. And just recently, Goku ascended to Ultimate Instinct, one or the other. And, I saw somebody actually talking about, well, that's like, the concept of like Christ in a glorified form. And like we were just having these discussion, but I think I see Goku in a Messiah level because he is constantly setting an example of laying down his life for his friends. And there's never been a consideration of, what that looks like for him. So I can totally see that. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a reason why the stories of sacrifice, death, and rebirth happen all the time. Maybe there's a larger story that we're longing for and want to be a part of. The reason that keeps getting recycled and played over and over again in the stories we consume.
Death's never permanent in comics.
Right.
Hey, when I was a kid, the
Uncle
phrase
Ben's
used
not back.
depends on the book.
That's next year's event. Yeah.
Well, when I was a kid, though, the phrase was always like hanging around the comic book shops I grew up in. Nobody stays dead in comics except Bucky.
Well, guess what happened?
Yeah,
that was a good story, though. That's well done.
Yeah, but then that literally he was dead longer than anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Because Bucky was dead from like the 60s until the like early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So he had like 40 years of actual dead. But I think that was just because they didn't know what to do with him. But
that's a good story idea. What? Sorry.
So kind of a joke question and then a more serious question. The joke question is Pacific Rim Uprising, no, maybe yes, or all caps yes. A more serious question, as serious as this panel is, I guess, 1 or 2 graphic novels or novels that aren't DC or Marvel that you guys would recommend. I'm saying graphic novel just because I personally don't like to try to collect a bunch of loose issues. I prefer the trade paperback. So like something that's outside the big 2.
Okay.
I would say Black Hammer. Jeff Lemire's Black Hammer Dark Horse is a good one. Man, there's so many Image stuff too.
I didn't know if you had like Valiant or IDW or something.
I'm sorry, the question one more time?
Non-big 2 books to recommend.
Like
Chris really loves Valiant.
Or even just a novel.
If you want to jump in the Valiant universe, Chris, where would you jump in first?
Right off the bat, probably it's the one that hooked me is I'd go back and read Rye. In the 2000 iteration, the earlier stuff's really good as well, but the arc that when the company came back and they were reinstilled, that Rye, it's a cool
RYE
RAI it's a very Blade Runner story. He's basically a replicant, for lack of a better term, but this is going to help you put your brain around it. The Rise were multiple. There was always one at a time, and one was always raised to be the protector of New Japan. There was an ultimate war that wiped out the Earth. New Japan technology literally creates a floating island above the wasteland that is Earth. And there's a new ruler, a new emperor that oversees it, and Rise were always created to be the defender of New Japan. The point of the overarching story is that multiple Rise over time basically figured out that the new emperor does not have New Japan's safety actually in interest whatsoever. And every time that Rai becomes self-aware that the person sending him off to basically execute random people is not genuine in this, as soon as they become self-aware, boss has them whacked. So the story is basically this robot that comes aware of this reality, a moral choice actually being presented, and then the unfolding reality of how he then, as a sentient AI, hides that he knows this from what appears to be an all-knowing being, and then still being able to do good. So that's kind of, it's an interesting redemptive story. Valiant stuff is very deep in their color saturation, so they're very pretty. Valiant also tends to be very violent, so that's the only the thing that I say on the side is there's obviously great redemptive stories in a lot of they have a self-contained superhero universe across all their stuff, but I find that to be an easier entry point from how graphic it is, which is not as bad as some of the other stories, but also has a redemptive story that's being told as part of it.
I'll piggyback on that. Image put out Jeff Lemire's book called Descender, which is kind of another AI robot. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be self-aware kind of story? I really love that story. I'd really love to see that as a TV show or maybe at some point.
And I'm going to pull a not comic book novel. Two novels. There are two things I would recommend, but they still fit in the geeky world. One is The Book of Lies by Brad Meltzer. He writes comics, but he mainly writes suspense mystery novels. He did a book probably about a decade ago called The Book of Lies that ties the murder of Abel in the Bible to the murder of Superman's creator's father. Like the dust jacket of the book says, when Cain killed Abel, the murder weapon was never found. When Superman's creator's father was murdered, that weapon was never found, and now those stories intersect. And it's this
cool.
It's a really neat story. But also, if you haven't read it, I would recommend reading C.S. Lewis's sci-fi trilogy, which came out before Narnia, but he wrote sci-fi before sci-fi was really sci-fi. It's a 3-book series called Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and That Hideous Strength. But it deals with space travel long before anything that we read, but it reads just like Star Trek.
Out of the Silent Planet.
Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and then but it's a 3-part series, and it goes from it covers several lifespans in one really good story. And the second book, Paralandra, is one of the most beautiful things I've ever read, but it's also one of those things that sounds like when you read it, this could never be a movie because it's written so big. It makes Ready Player One look like Pong. And so, but I would recommend C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy.
We read Out of the Silent Planet in one of our God Loves Geeks book club meetings just to kind of talk about the science fiction, and it deals a lot with life on other planets. What would that look like? What if there was another planet that hadn't fallen from grace? They're still in communion with God. Pretty cool ideas there.
It gets a little trippy.
It does.
Each book through the series, I think it's a little trippy.
The first one is the most straightforward sci-fi, and then it gets into sci-fi fantasy, and then it gets into way sci-fi fantasy.
One more question, then you got a wedding to do.
Yeah,
Yes.
we got to do this thing.
Yep.
What kind of books or comic books would you guys recommend for talking about like confronting darkness in the world and confronting like hatred in the world?
Man, there's so many. Like it seems like every comic story arc is wrestling with the idea of how do we do justice in the world? How to reflect light? How do I respond to tragedy? And that's the basic arc of hero or villain is how do I respond to this tragedy that's happened either to me or someone else. But that's a great question. I think all the stuff we mentioned I think would be a good one, but I don't know if you guys something that comes right to your mind. Or
Personally, on that, reading The Walking Dead has always been a staple for that for me. And I understand some people just watch the show, and there's a lot of backlog to catch up on.
So much
I think we're on issue like 177 or something.
Yeah.
There's a lot of issues, but I think that's always because when the big thing is with Walking Dead, the parallel they point out is that we're not that different now than we would be if the world fell apart.
Yep.
Like issue 48 was that big deal for me reading The Walking Dead because it's that big speech that Rick gives of like, no, we are the Walking Dead. And, it's like we're dealing with our darkness on a daily basis. So just honestly, I wouldn't say try and buy it because good grief, it's expensive to get all that. But to read through it, I think that's probably my staple for that.
Just on the graphic novel thing, real quick, have any of you read Klaus? And what did you think of it?
Oh, the Grant Morrison run about like
It's like a retelling of the story of Santa Claus, but from like almost like a
devoid of any of
Grimm's-
his like being a bishop in the 4th century.
Well, he's like a. Gosh, I haven't read it yet. I've just flipped through it. But
Yeah, I've read it. It's
a lot of the traditional Christmas stories, but kind of it's very Grimm's fairy tales version of the Santa Claus story. But I was just gonna see
it's definitely Morrison's flavor of Yeah, I'll talk with you after.
Yeah, as we said, any of you that have questions, you can look up. I think our names are in the program, but if not, tackle some of us as you see us throughout the day. Add us on Facebook, and feel more than free to reach out to all of us. For me, I'm at Ultimate Comics, so come into the store. But
I'll be at booth A512
there you go.
for the majority of the weekend. That's my booth, like that over that way.
Cool. Thank you all.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you
it.
guys so much.
Yeah.
And if you would like to be a part of it, there's going to be an actual wedding on the con floor in the back left
In
corner.
that corner.
They're getting married in like nerdy suits and everything, and
Batman and Catwoman, finally?
it's Superman and Wonder Woman.
That works.
But it's going to be a legit wedding, and they would love everyone to, if you want to come celebrate with them. That's why I'm dressed like Mario. They wanted me to marry them in a costume. So,
Awesome. Thank you all.
thank y'all so much.